At 2:16 a.m. on March 4, 1943, German radar caught the impossible, an intruder flying low, faster than their fighters, then vanishing like smoke. By dawn, the wreck they mocked as furniture revealed the truth, a wooden machine built to outrun fear itself. This is no man's land, where we dig up the forgotten weapons, mines, and moments of World War II. Tonight, how a handful of carpenters and engineers turned wood, glue, and mathematics into a phantom that outsmarted the Reich. Subscribe to No Man's Land to keep these missing pages alive. At 2:16 in the morning, March 4, 1943, the radar operators at Station Bremen, north of Kassel, noticed something that froze the room. A single faint blip, low to the ground, streaking across their screen at a speed no known aircraft could reach. Lieutenant Hans Meyer tapped the glass, thinking it was a glitch. But the trace vanished, reversed course, and reappeared again. "That can't be right," he whispered. For months, there had been rumors, stories of a mysterious British aircraft striking deep inside the Reich, moving faster than Messerschmitt interceptors, and fading before searchlights could catch it. The men had laughed, calling it Der Geist, the ghost. But tonight, the ghost had a heading, altitude, and speed that defied the laws of flight. At 2:22, the order went out. Searchlights swept the sky. Anti-aircraft guns opened fire on a target they could barely see, a shimmer of silver slipping through the clouds. Then, a flash of orange. Witnesses reported seeing a burning shape skim the treetops before breaking apart in a field outside Kassel. By dawn, Luftwaffe guards surrounded the wreck. Colonel Dietrich from the Technical Inspection Command arrived expecting to find a shattered bomber of aluminum and steel. Instead, he crouched beside the wreckage and smelled burnt varnish. The fuselage wasn't metal, it was wood, layers of birch and balsa, glued together into something strangely smooth, almost like furniture. His engineers laughed. "So this is the ghost? They send us a cabinet." They didn't realize it yet, but that cabinet had just crossed the channel at speeds the Luftwaffe could only dream of. As they mocked it, British carpenters and chemists were already building another, shaping, sanding, and bonding the next de Havilland Mosquito. A machine that would soon hum through the night sky faster than radar, faster than sound, and faster than reason itself. The ghost had been born, and the age of steel had just met its match in wood. In the late 1930s, as Europe edged toward war, the British Air Ministry demanded bombers that could carry heavier loads and survive heavier fire. Steel, armor, and guns, those were the holy trinity of modern air power. But at the de Havilland Aircraft Company, one man refused to follow the gospel. Geoffrey de Havilland, a quiet engineer with the confidence of a craftsman, believed the future didn't belong to the heaviest plane. It belonged to the fastest. He proposed something absurd: a bomber with no guns, no gunners, and no armor. Just 2 engines and a smooth wooden shell. Officials laughed him out of the room. "A wooden airplane," one said. "You might as well send up a piano." But de Havilland understood something his critics didn't. Britain had aluminum shortages, but it had forests and craftsmen. Piano makers, cabinet builders, and furniture workers could shape wood with precision machines couldn't. When the war began, he turned those workshops into aircraft factories. The smell of glue replaced that of oil. The sound of saws replaced hammering rivets. Teams layered thin birch sheets over molds, bonding them with a new synthetic resin stronger than steel. 2 halves of a fuselage, each crafted like the body of a violin, were joined around a roaring Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. What emerged was beautiful, smooth, and light. the de Havilland DH-98, soon to be known as the Mosquito. In December 1941, its first test flight shattered every expectation. Without armor or turrets, the plane weighed nearly half of a conventional bomber, but flew faster than any fighter in service. Engineers watched the prototype climb like a hawk, slicing through clouds as if the air itself bent out of respect. De Havilland's heresy had worked. The world's first true multi-role aircraft was born not from metal, but from imagination. What Britain's bureaucrats had dismissed as folly would soon become the silent terror haunting Nazi skies. By the spring of 1943, German night fighter squadrons had a new word whispered between them: Der Holzgeist, the wooden ghost. Radar crews first noticed it as a faint echo barely brighter than a bird. It would appear for a moment, then vanish completely, as if swallowed by the air itself. Pilots sent to intercept reported chasing shadows, glimpses of something pale streaking across the moonlight, then gone before their engines reached full power. Ground controllers accused them of panic. But the damage reports told another story. Rail yards, refineries, and Gestapo offices across the Reich were being struck with eerie precision by what seemed to be invisible planes. At the Luftwaffe's technical center in Rechlin, engineers tried to make sense of it. Their calculations insisted that a wooden airframe could never survive flight beyond 400 miles per hour. The drag alone should tear it apart. And yet the evidence lay in ashes from Hamburg to Cologne. The Mosquito's birch and balsa laminate, strengthened with phenolic resin glue, gave it a skin that flexed with pressure instead of fracturing. It didn't fight the air. It flowed through it. On radar, its wooden body reflected barely half the signal of a standard bomber, making it nearly impossible to track. Each night, the same pattern repeated. Searchlights probed empty skies, flak batteries fired blind, and the ghost passed overhead unseen. In Berlin, officers mocked the idea of stealth as British fantasy. But the fear was spreading. Mechanics began calling the unseen intruder Der Schrecken aus Holz, the terror of wood. They didn't know it yet, but they were witnessing the birth of something completely new. Warfare defined not by brute force, but by intellect. The Mosquito wasn't just an aircraft. It was proof that physics could be bent by imagination, and that even a wooden shadow could rewrite the rules of the sky. In a quiet suburb of Hertfordshire, England, far from the roar of the front lines, another kind of battle was being fought, not with bullets, but with sawdust and glue. Inside the de Havilland factory at Hatfield, hundreds of men and women moved like an orchestra, each worker a note in a symphony of precision. The air smelled of resin and fresh-cut birch. The floors glimmered with varnish, and hanging above the workbenches were the half-finished shells of the machines that would soon terrify the Luftwaffe. Here, cabinet makers, carpenters, and even violin craftsmen were building the fastest combat aircraft in the world, out of something the military had once called useless: wood. Each Mosquito was hand-built like a piece of art. Thin sheets of birch and balsa were layered in alternating directions to form a plywood stronger than aluminum. Every curve of the fuselage was sanded until it was mirror smooth, reducing drag to almost nothing. The workers didn't use rivets or bolts. They used glue, an amber-colored phenolic resin that bonded with the wood on a molecular level. It created a shell so seamless that air slipped over it like silk. The result was a plane so light it could carry the same payload as a Lancaster bomber at nearly twice the speed. Engineers began calling it the wooden miracle. The factory hummed day and night. Women who once stitched dresses now stitched control surfaces. Carpenters who once built pianos shaped wings. De Havilland's son, Jeffrey Jr., personally inspected each fuselage half before the two sides were joined together around the twin Merlin engines. "Speed is armor," he would say quietly to new recruits. "If you can't catch it, you can't kill it." The design's simplicity meant the Mosquito could be built in furniture shops and schools, far from the reach of German bombers. Across Britain, dozens of small workshops became secret aircraft plants, each producing a handful of parts that would eventually form another ghost in the sky. When the first production models rolled out in late 1942, even hardened RAF pilots couldn't hide their awe. Sleek, silver gray, and unarmed, the Mosquito looked too beautiful to fight. But once it lifted off, it proved faster than any interceptor in Hitler's arsenal. Its Merlin engines sang a high, smooth note that cut through the clouds like a blade. The wooden airframe vibrated with life, flexible yet unbreakable. One test pilot described the sensation as riding the breath of God. In combat, the Mosquito could climb to 26,000 feet, dive like a hawk, and vanish from radar before enemy guns even opened fire. Across the Channel, German scientists at Rechlin still scoffed. They believed superiority came from mass, not imagination. They built their machines heavier, louder, and stronger, believing that more armor meant more power. But every night, Mosquitoes slipped past them, gliding through the flak fields to deliver surgical strikes on radar stations, command posts, and rail lines. They became the RAF's invisible hand, guiding bombers to their targets, photographing enemy defenses, and vanishing before the Reich could react. The irony was cruel. While Germany's engineers worshipped precision metalwork, Britain's craftsmen were winning the air war with glue and timber. Each Mosquito that left the Hatfield line carried not only bombs and flares, but the spirit of ingenuity itself, a quiet defiance built into every polished grain. The men in London's war rooms began to realize what de Havilland had known all along. The age of armor was ending. The future belonged to those who could think faster than their enemies could build. By early 1943, the Mosquito had already proven itself as the fastest aircraft in the Allied arsenal. But its true purpose, the role that would redefine aerial warfare, was only beginning to unfold. At RAF Wyton, a damp airfield buried in the fog of Cambridgeshire, a group of mathematicians and pilots gathered around chalkboards filled with arcs, numbers, and radio frequencies. Their leader was a calm, sharp-eyed Australian named Air Vice Marshal Don Bennett. He wasn't interested in glory or dogfights. He was obsessed with one thing: precision. "Bravery," he once said, "is meaningless if you can't hit what you're aiming at." Bennett had grown frustrated watching bomber crews drop thousands of tons of explosives into darkness, missing their targets by miles. The strategy of saturation bombing was turning cities into rubble, but doing little to break the Reich's war machine. He proposed something radical: use the Mosquito's speed and agility to guide the bombers, marking exact targets with flares before the heavy squadrons arrived. His plan sounded simple, but it demanded perfection: flawless timing, unshakable navigation, and faith in mathematics. Thus, the Pathfinder Force was born. Inside each Mosquito cockpit, a new instrument glowed softly: the oboe navigation receiver, an elegant gray box connected to ground transmitters scattered across southern England. Its purpose was to turn radio signals into geometry. As the aircraft flew across the Channel, ground stations emitted pulses that bounced back from the Mosquito's transponder. By measuring the milliseconds between signal and echo, operators could calculate the exact position of the plane along an invisible circular arc in the sky. To the navigator, these equations became music. A rising tone meant the aircraft was off course. A steady hum meant perfection. When the pitch peaked, it was time to release the flare. This was the sound of mathematics turned into survival. Every Pathfinder mission was a dance between man, machine, and number. The pilot focused on maintaining altitude and speed, trusting the faint buzz in his headset to keep him on course. The navigator monitored a cathode ray display, a tiny green blip sliding along a line of light. If it drifted too far, the aircraft was off by mere yards, and the entire bombing wave would miss its mark. Timing had to be exact to the 10th of a second. A single heartbeat of delay could mean hundreds of lives lost. On the night of February 13, 1943, Bennett briefed his crews for a raid on Cologne. "Gentlemen," he said, pointing to a small red circle on the map, "our job is to light a single dot in the darkness. The rest of the war will follow that light." As the engines roared to life, fog rolled across the runway like a living thing. The mosquitoes lifted off one by one, vanishing into the clouds. High above the continent, the navigators listened to the tone of the oboe rise. Steady, steady. Then a sharp whistle. The bomb bay doors opened. A single magnesium flare dropped into the void, spinning like a star. Seconds later, Cologne lit up red, the heart of the city burning with precision never seen before. Back in England, radar screens registered the signal's final pulse before it vanished. Then came the drone of hundreds of heavy bombers steering toward that glowing mark, following the Pathfinder's mathematical trail. By dawn, the reconnaissance photos showed devastation not of neighborhoods, but of rail junctions, power plants, and ammunition depots. Proof that the age of blind bombing was over. To the men who flew them, the Mosquito wasn't just a machine. It was a tool of reason, a wooden body carrying a brain made of vacuum tubes, dials, and pure human intellect. The Pathfinders had turned the night sky into a canvas of geometry, painting war with light and logic. And in doing so, they proved that numbers could be just as deadly as bullets. By 1944, the Mosquito had become more than an aircraft. It was an extension of Britain's brain. Across the skies of Europe, the Pathfinders flew not by instinct, but by calculation, guided by invisible lines of radio energy stretched between England and their targets hundreds of miles away. The oboe system was now joined by another revolutionary technology known as H2S, the world's first airborne ground mapping radar. In the glow of the cockpit, the navigator's screen came alive with ghostly images of coastlines, rivers, and cities, rendered not in light, but in radio waves. For the first time in history, pilots could see through clouds, smoke, and darkness. It was as if the night itself had become transparent. Every mission was a feat of perfect synchronization. The Mosquitoes flew arcs so precise that a single misstep could collapse the entire bombing plan. Their tones and pulses were tracked by female operators back in England. Young women hunched over cathode ray tubes, whispering, "Mark, mark, mark," as they aligned echoes returning at the speed of light. Each whisper represented a calculation, each calculation a coordinate, each coordinate a life saved. The Germans tried desperately to fight back. At first, they believed the British were using invisible spotters on the ground. When that failed, they unleashed a storm of radio interference, jamming every known frequency. But they never understood that oboe's true weapon wasn't its signal. It was its math. The British engineers had built harmonic filters that could separate the true echo from the noise, isolating the real tone hidden beneath the chaos. While the Luftwaffe filled the air with static, the Pathfinders calmly followed their rhythm across the sky. On May 19, 1944, a Mosquito squadron flew through thunder and flak to mark the railway yards at Le Mans. In torrential rain, the navigator tuned the tone to perfect pitch, and at 23:22 hours, he released the marker. The flare ignited, bright as sunrise. 2 minutes later, the bomber stream arrived, guided by that single point of light. When the smoke cleared, the yards were obliterated with less than a 300-yard margin of error. To the men on the ground, it looked like divine precision. But to the pathfinders, it was simply the beauty of numbers at work. By the summer of 1944, the Luftwaffe was desperate. Its pilots spoke of the wooden ghosts that ruled the skies, planes that came without warning, marked targets with inhuman accuracy, and vanished before a single interceptor could reach altitude. German scientists swore that such precision was impossible, yet the photographs from British raids proved otherwise. Every bridge, every rail yard, every factory hit squarely in its center. The Reich had become a map of red circles, each one drawn by a mosquito. Still, for all its success, fate has a cruel balance, and one night the ghost finally stayed too long. August 12, 1944. The industrial city of Kassel burned beneath a curtain of smoke. Overhead, a single mosquito from the Pathfinder force circled back through the chaos, confirming that its marker flares were still on target. It was a fatal act of professionalism. Anti-aircraft crews locked onto the returning signal. A flak burst exploded just ahead of the cockpit. One of the Merlin engines flamed out, then the other. Witnesses on the ground watched as the aircraft glided down silently, its wooden wings glowing orange from fire, drifting like a wounded bird. It clipped a row of pine trees and came to rest in a field outside the city. By dawn, German patrols surrounded the wreck. To their astonishment, the mosquito was nearly intact. The fuselage was still warm, its varnished surface gleaming in the sunlight. Colonel Dietrich and his team from the Luftwaffe's technical command arrived within hours. They had spent 2 years chasing rumors of this machine, the furniture bomber, the invisible menace, and now they finally had one to study. "So this is the plane that humiliated us," the colonel said, running his gloved hand along the smooth wooden frame. Plywood and glue. He ordered it transported to the secret testing facility at Rechlin. The soldiers who loaded it onto the truck joked that it looked more like a work of art than a weapon. They didn't yet realize they were escorting a miracle. The ghost of Kassel was about to reveal the secret that would humble an empire built on steel. 3 days later, under the harsh floodlights of Hangar 3 at the Rechlin Testing Center, the engineers gathered around the captured mosquito. For years, they had dismissed reports of its existence. Wooden aircraft were relics of a bygone age. Yet here it was, resting on trestles, its pale fuselage shimmering like marble. The colonel ordered the panels opened. What they found silenced the room. The inner skin was not simple plywood, but a perfect sandwich of birch and balsa bonded by a translucent resin. When they cut into it, the material didn't splinter. It flexed and sealed itself again, as if alive. Tests showed it resisted moisture, heat, and even compression better than the lightweight alloys the Germans prized so dearly. One engineer whispered, "This isn't furniture. This is alchemy." As they worked deeper, the mysteries multiplied. Behind the navigator's seat, they uncovered a maze of wires and vacuum tubes glowing faintly. The oboe receiver. Its dials were labeled in neat English: cathode delay line, pulse selector, phase inverter. No one in the room fully understood it. Specialists from the electronics division arrived, bringing oscilloscopes and notebooks. They traced circuits and murmured in disbelief. "They've turned the sky into a calculator," one finally said. Then came the bomb sight, a compact instrument of brass and glass, so intricate it seemed to breathe when powered. Its gears and cams moved with impossible smoothness, silently calculating angles, altitude, and wind drift in real time. "It thinks," said a young technician, awestruck. "You feed it numbers, and it answers." For days, Recklin's brightest minds tested, measured, and cataloged. The wooden shell outperformed aluminum in stress tests. Its radar signature was nearly invisible. The glue, phenolic resin mixed with casein, was stronger than steel, impervious to heat and cold. Every bolt, every gauge, every ergonomic switch in the cockpit spoke of intelligence guided by simplicity. Colonel Dietrich's final report to Berlin read like confession. "The British fight us not with armor, but with intellect. And intellect weighs nothing." By the time the report reached headquarters, Allied bombers were already leveling the factory that built the Mosquito's twin engines. The irony was bitter. The Germans had finally understood the secret of their enemy's genius, but by then, it was far too late. When the war finally ended, the airfields that had once thundered with engines fell silent. Across Europe, the wreckage of 1,000 steel machines rusted in the grass. Torn wings, twisted fuselages, forgotten monuments to arrogance. Yet in one corner of England, under a hangar roof at Hatfield, a single Mosquito remained intact, its varnished skin still gleaming beneath the dust. Mechanics who had built it during the war stood around it in quiet reverence. It had outlasted the empire that tried to destroy it. To them, it wasn't just an aircraft. It was a philosophy made real. Speed instead of strength. Intellect instead of intimidation. In Germany, the few surviving engineers from Rechlin faced their own reckoning. Among the ruins of their laboratories, Colonel Dietrich kept a single relic, a small sliver of the Mosquito's fuselage polished smooth from being held so often. In his final diary entry, later found by Allied investigators, he wrote, "We built for power. They built for purpose. Wood bends, steel breaks." It was a confession not of defeat, but of revelation. For all their science, the Luftwaffe had forgotten imagination. The Mosquito's influence didn't die with the war. Its composite construction inspired the next generation of jet aircraft, teaching engineers that strength could come from structure, not just material. Its radar mapping and navigation systems became the foundation for Cold War reconnaissance technology. Even its handcrafted precision lived on, in industries from aerospace to architecture. The wooden ghost had changed not just the war, but the very way humans thought about design. Many of the men and women who built the Mosquito returned to quiet lives as furniture makers and craftsmen, their names lost to history. Yet their work endures in every surviving aircraft that still takes to the air at commemorative shows. When its twin Merlin engines start up, their pitch rises into a pure, haunting note that silences the crowd. The Mosquito climbs lightly into the sky, as if reminding the world that genius doesn't always roar. It often hums softly in the background, made of glue, wood, and courage. This is no man's land, and this was the story of the plane that defied logic, humbled empires, and proved that imagination, when armed with precision, can rewrite the laws of war.